I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary. I genuinely believe that. Not as a slogan, not as motivation for a poster, as a factual observation from watching how the world actually works. Most people accept the income they were handed. They take the first offer. They stay in the lane they were placed in. They wait for someone to notice them and reward them, and they call that being realistic. I call it leaving an enormous amount of money and life on the table. Today, I want to talk about income, how to earn more, how to think about it differently, and why almost everything you were taught about it is backwards. Let me start with something that sounds extreme, but is actually just math. Work like hell. I mean, you just have to put in 80 to 100-hour weeks every week. If other people are putting in 40-hour work weeks and you're putting in 100-hour work weeks, then even if you're doing the same thing, you will achieve in 4 months what it takes them a year to achieve. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not sustainable. That's not balance. That's not healthy. And you're not entirely wrong. But here's the point people miss. I'm not saying work 100 hours forever. I'm saying understand what intensity actually does to a timeline. The gap between someone who gives 40% and someone who gives 100% is not 60%. It's years. It's decades. It's the difference between building something that matters and spending your whole life almost getting there. The question isn't whether you work hard. The question is whether your effort matches the size of what you're trying to build. Now, here's something that took me a long time to fully understand. You get paid in direct proportion to the difficulty of problems you solve. Read that again. Not the number of hours, not how long you've been doing something, not how loyal you've been to a company, the difficulty of the problems you solve. This is the entire secret to income growth, compressed into one sentence. The market doesn't pay for effort, the market pays for solutions. Easy problems, the ones anyone can solve, pay average wages, because supply is unlimited. If 1 million people can do what you do, why would anyone pay you more than the minimum? But hard problems, rare problems, problems that make companies bleed money until someone fixes them, those pay extraordinarily well, because the supply of people who can solve them is tiny. So the most important income question you can ask yourself is not, how do I work harder? It's, am I solving harder problems? Because if the answer is no, if you are solving the same problems you solved 3 years ago, your income ceiling has not moved, and it won't, until the problems you take on do. Here's something people misunderstand about talent. Talent is extremely important. It's like a sports team. The team that has the best individual player will often win. But then there's a multiplier from how those players work together and the strategy they employ. What does this mean for your income? Raw talent alone is not enough. The person who earns the most is rarely the most talented person in the room. They are the person who combined their talent with a strategy, with the right people, with relentless execution. Talent is the starting point. But the multiplier, the thing that actually determines what you earn, is everything that happens after the talent. The direction you point it, the problems you choose to apply it to, the people you surround yourself with, the consistency with which you show up. Most people have more talent than they use. The bottleneck is never the raw material. The bottleneck is always the decision of what to build with it. I don't create companies for the sake of creating companies. I create them to get things done. This is a philosophy that completely changes how you think about income. Most people approach earning money as the goal. Get a job, climb the ladder, get a raise, repeat. But the people who break through to genuinely different income levels are almost always focused on a different question. Not how do I earn more, but what problem am I trying to solve, and how do I build something around that? When the focus shifts from income to impact, income stops being the ceiling, it becomes the byproduct. Think about every major wealth creation story. Nobody sat down and said, I want to make $1 billion. What should I pretend to care about? They found something they believed the world needed, something broken they wanted to fix, something that wasn't there that should be, and then they built it with everything they had. The income followed. It always follows real value. The problem is, most people try to chase the income before they've created the value. And it doesn't work that way. I don't believe in process as a substitute for thinking. In fact, when I interview a potential employee and they say, it's all about the process, I see that as a bad sign. The problem is that at a lot of big companies, process becomes a substitute for thinking. You're encouraged to behave like a little gear in a complex machine, and that is the fastest way to cap your income at a predictable, average number. Because gears are replaceable, by definition. The people who earn significantly more than average are the people who think, who question, who ask why something is done this way and whether there's a better way. This isn't comfortable. Organizations don't always reward it in the short term. But over time, the people who think independently, who bring new answers instead of following old procedures, those people become indispensable. And indispensable people do not earn average wages. So the habit that protects your income ceiling more than any other is the habit of thinking for yourself. Question the assumptions in your industry. Question the way things have always been done. Ask what would happen if you approach this problem from first principles, from scratch, without inheriting the conventional answer. The answer you find might be worth a great deal more than the answer everyone else is already using. Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. I want to spend a moment on this because it is the most underrated income factor there is. Not skill, not intelligence, not connections, not luck. Persistence. Here is what almost nobody tells you about income growth. It doesn't follow a straight line. There are long periods where nothing seems to move, where you're working hard, building skills, making bets, and the results don't seem to reflect any of it. Most people quit in those periods. They conclude that it isn't working, that they should try something else, that maybe this isn't for them. And the devastating irony is, those are often the exact moments just before the breakthrough. The compound effect of consistently applied effort doesn't show up linearly. It shows up suddenly, after years of invisible accumulation. The income leap you want is almost always on the other side of the period where everything looks like it isn't working. The people who break through are not smarter. They're the ones who didn't stop. I'd rather be optimistic and wrong than pessimistic and right. When it comes to your income, this might be the most financially important sentence I can offer you. Most people cap their own earnings before the market ever does. They talk themselves out of asking for more. They decide in advance that they won't get the role. They lower the price before anyone even pushes back. And then they call it being realistic. But pessimism about your own potential is not realism. It's a prediction you make and then fulfill. The person who walks into a negotiation believing they deserve more behaves differently, speaks differently, asks for different numbers, and gets different outcomes. Your income is not determined by the economy. It is not determined by your industry or your background or your age. It is determined, more than anything, by what you believe is possible for you. Change that belief. And watch how differently you move through every room, every conversation, every opportunity. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. Building a bigger income isn't comfortable. It requires learning things that are hard, having conversations that are awkward, taking bets that might not work, staying in the game during stretches where progress is invisible. None of that is easy. But the alternative, staying exactly where you are, earning exactly what you earn, because the growth felt too uncertain, that has a cost too. A cost that compounds quietly over years. The question is not whether there is risk in pursuing more. There always is. The question is whether what you're building is important enough to you to move forward anyway. If the answer is yes, then the odds don't matter as much as you think. Because people who want something badly enough, who are willing to work for it relentlessly, who refuse to stop when it gets hard, those people have a way of making the odds irrelevant. Start today. One harder problem, one bigger ask, one decision to think differently than you did yesterday. That is where income growth begins. And there is no version of this where you regret starting sooner.